Hello and welcome to Let's Improv a Story, a podcast where I try not to say Let's Improv a Podcast when I say the title, but also a podcast where we, on the fly, try to make up a story for a well-known intellectual property or whatever group of content or stories we're into that day. And today, we try to come up with a story for something that certainly has been attempted and maybe is being attempted right now as we speak. And as always, we're trying to do something that could be published or greenlit by a studio and not just fan fiction. Fan fiction is wonderful. We want to do something that could potentially be made. And so, I guess in honor of what I just learned is a real thing, the Back to the Future, the musical, let's try to come up with another Back to the Future film. Now, first of all, I think my first instinct is to title it Back to the Future Part 4, because it's, Back to the Future Part 1, well, not Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and, the first, I think a more, cautious naming would just say, it's been a while, just call it Back to the Future. But, I'm one of those people where those movies are they're kind of sweet, precious things. I really enjoy those movies, and there's a real tone and quality to them where I feel kind of protective of them. And I think perhaps the people who worked on them feel that way too, and that's why there has not been another Back to the Future movies. Surely, now there are other big considerations why that might not happen, including, Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd's availability, and, everyone gets older, and, what they would do in such a movie and how they'd be involved and should they be involved. And also, you get things like, a DeLorean is now like an antique car. It's not like a sort of idiosyncratic car to choose like it was in the original. It's now like a straight up antique car. And so, but that's part of the iconography. And so you're now using an antique car as a time machine, as if they were using like a Model T in the original one. And then, it's what time period do you go back to? Do you go back to the 80s from now, the present day? But then you're dealing with considerations of, well, are you going to run into Marty and Doc and they're already doing time traveling adventures? Or you set it somewhere else and you don't involve them? People, certainly their involvement would be desired because, that's a simple sort of legacy sequel marketing kind of idea. But I think all those things are probably considered, and as every year goes by, I think you get further and further away from using Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox, and like Elizabeth Shue and whoever else. So, I think time, ironically enough, for a time travel intellectual property, will sort of not quite heal all wounds, but solve our problems here. Time takes away the options of using those characters, which then leads you towards a sort of reboot thing. And I think there's like a fan trailer on the internet with like Tom Holland as Marty McFly, but then you're just doing the same thing over again. And like, why would you wear that vest in 2020, whatever this is? Because it's awesome. It's an awesome vest. That's why. Because you saw Back to the Future. That's why you wear that vest. See, that's what we should do. We should have a movie that's set in a timeline where everyone's seen Back to the Future. And they're like, we're going to do it for real. So I think you do want a connection to the original movies. You don't just want a straight reboot. A straight reboot, we're just doing it all over again, but it's in the modern day. There's something to that, and that would be fun, and that would be fine. I'm sure it would do okay. But there's just something where it's like, there are certain things you don't have a desire maybe to reboot because you're so fond of or have such affection and connection to the original. And there's just such fun and joy in those original movies and creativity. They're the perfect kind of tone for a sort of, kind of family-friendly adventure that still has some ideas and some, for lack of a better term, edge to them, right? So that's why I'd be inclined to make it Back to the Future Part 4. So you're not saying it's like Back to the Future 2027, as, opposed to, I'm now blanking on the year Back to the Future came out. Let's say it was 88, like Back to the Future 88. I really can't remember what year it came out, sorry. If only there was some way to search it on the internet instantaneously. But I think, let's just, for lack of a better choice, let's say Back to the Future Part 4 is the title. And let's say we want some connection to the originals to make it all, a cohesive thing. It's not just other people made a time machine that's also maybe in a cool car somewhere else. So let's say, if we want to do it that way, then you're probably going to stick within like the family, right? So, and it can't be kids, because then you're, again, involving Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, and you may not have their involvement. So you'd probably have to go one step removed. And it's also been a while, since the 80s, I'm told. You probably want to do grandkids. So if you had something like, and obviously like, you do things where, it's the 21st century, so we try to be more, to mix things up more for many good reasons, and also just for their just variations are more interesting than doing the same thing again. So, you probably want to have something like, this time it's maybe like Doc Brown's granddaughter is the scientist or whatever. And maybe it's like, Marty Jr. or something is the grandson. Well, for lack of a better name, we'll call him Marty Jr. And they are maybe the pair we're following in this one. So that way, you've got, a dynamic between a sort of every person in a Marty and a more scientific-minded person in Doc Brown's granddaughter. Now, how you get a time machine and what they go back in time to do is tricky, because this is where we get into the fact of like, so if we base this around them, but it doesn't matter who we base it around, we have to figure out how time works, which is really easy. Ask any scientist. And figuring that out is a trick, obviously in real life, but in the Back to the Future movies, time works those movies are built around dramatic stakes. And you are set in a town, Hill Valley, in the 80s, then you go back to the 50s, and you are seeing these characters at different points of their lives. Again, like the original impetus, I believe, or for the Zemeckis was along the lines of, what if we hire Eric Stoltz and waste a week of time and then have to scramble to find and get lucky, find Michael J. Fox? No, that just happens in movies sometimes. Casting isn't perfect. People are great in different roles, et cetera, et cetera. But time works in these movies in a way where, so they're running like they do an experiment in a mall parking lot in the first movie, go back in time to the 50s. Marty starts making changes by his existence or in the 50s. And so once he starts making changes, he has a Polaroid photograph and his family starts disappearing in it. He realizes he's changing the future, which is, obviously a brilliant device there to inform the audience. It's perfect, it's visual, it's concise, it's easy, it's genius. So that means that he is in real time in the past, in the 50s, changing what's happening in the 80s. Okay. But he hasn't, he starts fading a little bit at certain points, but not completely, so it's not instantaneous. It's it's dramatic and not scientific. And that is fine, because this movie is a fun adventure that is built around these characters and what people are like. All right, the original impetus of the movie is, like, what if you... I forget if it was exactly like, what if your parents didn't get together, but I think it's more of, what if you could hang out or meet your parents when they were your age, right? You're in your teens, or, you're in that high school, college range. What if you hung out with your parents when you and they were the same age, which is a wild and cool idea. And in the second one, where they go to the future, Doc Brown, there's this big emphasis in the first one about not changing the future, so there's a future to go back to. Even though I think it does change, right? If I remember correctly, like his parents seem a little more successful and confident. Yeah, so he doesn't change it. But he's fine with that, and he gets an awesome truck. But in the second one, he is, Doc Brown's like, it's your kids, Marty. You got to go to the future and save your kids. Which, again, the idea that, like, hey, I'm going to jump into the future to mess with it so that it is better for my family is a wild thing to do. But that's the original start of that movie. And again, that's a sort of selfish end goal for Marty and Doc. And maybe they're kind of, punished for that karmically, because Old Biff grabs the almanac, goes back in time, gives it to young Biff, which, by the way, changes the sort of quote-unquote present in the 80s, but does not change the future Marty and Doc are in while they are, helping the actual Marty Jr. or whatever his name is in Back to the Future Part 2. So there's another element of like time, and it's time changes and how they don't change immediately. Almost like who knows, maybe it's like ripples in a pond or something, you make a change in time and the ripple expands out, and when it hits the shore is when it changes things. Who knows? That was a visual metaphor in Oppenheimer. So if you take, and then let's see, then they go back to the 50s and they've got to avoid themselves because that'll create a paradox, I guess. It also creates great, dramatic stakes and hijinks, which are really fun to watch. And yeah, then they go back, thrown back into the West, and Marty sees that Doc Brown died in a duel in the West when Marty's still in the 50s. Where are you, Marty? When are you? And so Marty goes back in time to change the past this time. In the second movie, he goes to the future to change the future. And in the third movie, he goes from the relative past to a more distant past to change the past so that Doc Brown survives. LOL, who cares about time? Let's just goof with it willy-nilly because these movies are delightful and wonderful and joyful and so much fun. So let's not worry about time travel. And as the time of this podcast goes along, let's not worry about it specifically because it eats up some time. Let's try to come up with a much more difficult thing to do, which is a story for a Back to the Future Part 4. Because, we're probably not going back in time to make sure our parents hook up. We're probably not going forward in time to save our kids. We're probably not going back to the Old West to do whatever. We are going to do something different. Otherwise, it really is just a reboot. And again, a reboot might happen one day, and that's fine. And, could, like many a reboot, could be good, could be bad. Who knows? But we want to find something different. And so if we have, we can't use Marty and Doc, so we've got to be away from them. We've got grandkids. And maybe they're actually in a different city. And let's see. If they're grandkids, they, of course, are the kids of Marty and Doc's, not, family's kids or whatever. And that means you need someone, first of all, you need a time machine. And you probably need a new time machine. You could do something like Doc Brown had a few DeLoreans, something, and maybe you drag one out later on. I'm a sucker for that time machine. It looks great. Does it still look great? I don't know. So you certainly, I think, would want to bring in a new version of that, but a car that looks like that now is going to be like a sports car or whatever, or a high-end sports car or something like that, which would be a little weird to make a time machine out of. So picking the car is difficult, and you'd almost maybe want to make a custom car or something, or mod one so much that it, is indistinguishable or whatever. Make it, hey, just make it look cool. That's easy. And do you need a car? Because there's this whole idea of, getting it to 88 miles per hour to go back in time. Can't you just, have a treadmill or try to do what they did at the end of Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Just put it on basically a car treadmill or whatever. But then again, farther and farther you get away, you could, don't make it a refrigerator or something like that, which is what I think their original idea was for Back to the Future, but then they were afraid that they would hear stories of kids locking themselves in refrigerators, to their harm. So they amazingly came up with this fun car instead. So what the time machine is, that you kind of have to keep, right? It's got to be some kind of vehicle. You could just go full out and have multiple ones, and which does spark an idea in me, which I think is a ton of fun. An idea, if you have multiple time machine vehicles, then you could have some sort of time machine car chase. And, the first idea is, well, I guess it's two ideas, right? The first idea is a time machine car chase could be, as you just find, a sort of, an action set piece. First, you could have people on the highway two time machines racing and like cutting each other off so they can't go back in time. And then, of course, the idea of people actually, going through time and, a time machine car race through time when you're jumping through time periods, which is harder to work out, but still a lot of fun. Maybe something for a sequel, part 5 or something. It would be a good way of escalating. I mean, just the idea of having a time machine car race where you're cutting people off sounds like a ton of fun. But so the first one, again, you're taking a family and a town and you're going back in time to see them when they were younger, and taking Marty from the present and going back in time and experiencing all that, which reveals things about his character and the characters of those he knew in the Back to the Future, the present. And so you probably want to do the same thing. You want to establish like a sort of like a Hill Valley, Gilmore Girls like small town. And establish those characters as like they do so efficiently in the first act, in the sort of the brilliantly constructed all setups all the time first act of Back to the Future Part 1. And now you get to the point, of course, the crux of it is, why do you go back in time? In the first one, it's largely about Marty's dad and being brave or confident. And how his parents, I guess, barely got together or something. Let's see, was the story about knocking out Biff there the first time? I'm not sure. Maybe? I guess so. Anyway, getting your parents together is probably not something you can do again, of course. That's a reboot. So you want to do something different. Like, instead of your parents being brought together, maybe... it's hard to go back in time to do with it. So why you go back in time is very tricky. It's like, so why, if we have two characters, if we have Doc Brown's granddaughter and Marty's grandson, and we're sending them back in time, I mean, you could go to the future, but again, and you may, but it is more fun to go back in time first. Because as the audience, you'll have people whose parents or whatever came from a certain time. If they're going from the 2020s to the 80s or 90s or 70s or something, that's interesting for more demographics. There's no one alive who's like, I know how cool it was in the 2040s. That hasn't happened yet. And if you're listening to this, on the moon in 2045, how's the moon dust today? What's up there? So you probably want to go back in time, at least for the first one. And you're not going to put parents together. You need to do something differently. We need to do something... Oh, yeah, right. Why are they going back in time? Why are they going back in time? It could be an accident, like the first one. The first one's an experiment gone awry. And this could be, I guess, a straight-up accident. Just grabbed my dad's car and went for a joyride on the highway, and I really wanted to open it up, so I was going for 100, and I went back in time 35 years. Which... and also building the time machine, Doc Brown seems pretty adamant that this is sort of an infernal machine that should not be replicated and should not exist. Even though he then, I guess, completely throws that idea out the window and makes a time-traveling flying train. So there's that. And I don't think, as fun as that sequence is, for a part 4, I don't think we want to find a time-traveling flying train, at least not yet. Again, that feels like a sequel or something. So, but you want to keep it around a core character family dynamic of why you're back in time. Whether it's, oops, we're back in time and we goofed up our family in the future, we got to fix it. Or even something along the lines of going forward or back in time to, help or save someone. So, I don't know, what if they're... what if, what do we say here? Maybe like someone's, I guess the granddaughter could be working on a time machine. She's like found Doc Brown's old notes or something. Or like a piece of property of his has been, I don't know, there's going to be construction. She's, he sends her a letter saying, you deal with it, maybe, and, he's forgotten some things he had there, or maybe he wants it to be carried on. Who knows? And maybe she's working on a time machine, and maybe her immediate father is divorced amicably. This is supposed to be a fun movie. Amicably, but realistically. They're very cool about it. They're taking it, they're making sure the kids are taken care of. So, and she's sad that her father is divorced, and maybe wants to go back in time to somehow fix that, but that wouldn't work. So she doesn't. And then, I don't know, maybe the father goes back in time, and they wake up. Maybe this could sound like Star Trek-y, but maybe there's some sort of like burst of energy when he goes back in time, which keeps, Marty Jr. and Doc Brown's granddaughter from changing. But he goes back in time, and they see things changing. Why would he go back in time? For like if he's divorced, he's probably thinking he wished he had not been divorced, or had maybe could find someone new, or maybe someone from his past. And maybe the granddaughter's father had like a missed connection. Okay. And so instead of the idea of like, what would it be like to hang out with your parents when they were young, it's instead more of like what if you could go back in time and fix a missed connection romance that didn't happen? Let's say like the father gets drunk, gets in the barely built time machine that the daughter has made. He goes back in time. That there's like a burst of energy knocking out, but also preserving the minds and memories of Marty Jr. and the granddaughter. They wake up and they see, pause. Let's pause this. They wake up and they see what? Well, if the father's going back in time for a misconnection, he needs to, of course, establish that. That's something the Back to the Future series is so good at. They understand time in their screenplay writing. You establish this here in the beginning so you can pay it off later. You can set it up, then pay it off. So the father would need to tell the daughter, like, hey, your mother and I love you. I'm sorry it didn't work out. And I'm thinking these days of a missed connection from a time earlier in that town's past. Maybe there's like a resort in the town. There was like a wedding there, and there was someone at the wedding, but then there'd be like photos of them. He needs to not know where the person is, right? If it's a real misconnection, he needs to he needs to be unable to look them up in the present, so much so that if he knew he could, he would travel back in time so that he could find them later on or something. So maybe it's like a resort, and there's like another party there, and he leaves the wedding. Maybe he's not really into maybe he loses the ring and they're mad at him. Who knows? Some hijinks or whatever. And he bumps into a woman who's at a party. And I don't know, she's on the outs with her boyfriend or something. It's the boyfriend's sister's party, so she's just kind of getting air. She helps him look for the ring that he dropped, I don't know, in a field or something. And they kind of end up walking around and having a romantic night. And then he finds the ring and gets swept up back into the wedding. And maybe he loses the ring after the actual ceremony. That makes more sense, during the reception. I don't know why. Just deal with it. We'll figure that out later. And so once he finds it, he's like, I found it. And then he gets swept up back in the wedding. And everyone's happy about it and sort of celebrating him. And that separates him from the missed connection woman. And he looks for her later and can't find her. So that's why, and she was visiting from out of town or whatever. And that's for the, boyfriend's sister's birthday party or whatever. And that explains the misconnection. And so we can't look her up, and it's the 80s or 90s or 70s or whatever. So there's not like, tons of photos of everything everywhere that you can just dig up people. So that gives a reason for the father to go back in time and, unpause where we were with Marty Jr. and the scientist granddaughter waking up from the burst of energy from the new time machine going back in time. And they wake up to see things have changed. But let's see. Maybe there's a way that she can tell what time period he went back to. She's like, oh, that's the night of that wedding. When was the wedding? Look up the wedding. Oh, that was when that wedding happened. Oh, he's going back to find that missed connection. And then Marty Jr. is like, yeah, but why? Look at the pictures on the walls. Look at the home we're in now. It looks different. You know, the pictures of you and everything are gone, and they're not replaced with like a different woman and a different family. They're, you know, kind of bland, sterile art. And then the you know, scientist daughter's like, oh no, my father went back in time to, you know, get this missed connection or whatever, but he didn't succeed. He must have messed something up. This isn't, you know, him and his missed connection woman's house. This is a bachelor pad. Oh no. So they know they have to go back in time and fix the past. And so they do. I guess and this is where maybe like you dig out and fix up like another DeLorean that Doc had. Because of course the first one got destroyed in the first one, or the third one, I mean, in the first trilogy. Spoilers. So they go back in time, and then what? Well, I mean, they need to, you know, it's all the same sort of fun stuff you do in the first movie, but you're in whatever, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and you are, because, yeah, so the first one's like pretty much like 85 to 55, 30 years, and I guess that would be 95 to 05 to 15 to 25, 1995. The 90s were kind of, in a way, a bit like the 50s, more than people think, more than people might realize. Anyway, sure, 1995, why not? So even if you go back to 95, I think rule number one is, if it is still Hill Valley, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but if it is, then, you know, rule number one is avoid Marty McFly and Doc Brown, which that feels so much like the end of, you know, third act of Back to the Future Part 2 that, you know, it probably should be a different town. So you're in a sort of this resort town, you're bumping into people, their friends and family, when they're younger, you know, seeing different parts of the town. The town is a character in these movies, how it develops. But first thing I do is just what Marty did in the first one, which is sort of get your bearings. And so where are we? How do we work in this? You know, I mean, obviously all the immediate fun stuff of, you know, your cell phones don't work. Well, I mean, they have battery. Oh, that's a little somewhat charming too, is they have batteries that are going to run out. So you have a whole movie length, a movie length run of their batteries going down on their phones. But yeah, you know, obviously things are very different 30 years ago because of the, you know, rise of cell phones and apps and everything. So they got to get their bearings, and then they got to locate the dad. And which they've got to locate the dad. They've got to, which they probably have to do by going to the resort, locating the wedding. Maybe they bump into the sort of sister whose birthday party is occurring at the same time. And maybe they're like a week early or something like that. And yeah, I mean, at a certain point, like, you know, they've got to, you know, interact with the missed connection woman and their father. And then, you know, the young father will be there as well. And I guess you're dealing with whether or not you want to make a change. But if you make too big a change, the granddaughter won't exist. They can't do that. They've got to protect, you know, her existence. You know, I can't have my dad, you know, get together with the misconnection woman now in the 90s. You know, I might not exist. So, and that'd be a pretty big change to the future. So I think they need to first, like, get their dad back to the present. Now, in the first movie, you know, obviously, which leads to the incredible climax, there's a problem with the time machine, and they can't just immediately go back to the future. They've got to fix the future and fix the time machine. And of course, it ends on a clock. I mean, it's wonderful. So, I mean, you've got to do a similar thing. I don't know that you need a broken time machine, but you do need to find out what the dad goofed up and fix it. So you may have to do something along the lines of, you know, I mean, the obvious thing is to go back to the point where he arrives and then just stop him. But you don't know when exactly he arrived, maybe? I don't know. I mean, these are all very difficult plot mechanics. And I think, you know, as the podcast here goes along, we're off to like a decent start. And I mean, you know, maybe going back to solid footing, talking about like a time machine car chase. If you have the new time machine and the classic time machine, and let's say the misconnection woman somehow gets freaked out by whatchamacallit, Marty Jr. and the scientist's granddaughter following her as they try to locate her dad, then, maybe Marty Jr., who I guess would say, to give him a little more utility, let's see, if he were the one who drives it. Oh, yeah, okay. Let's say the scientist's granddaughter is from either New York or California and just doesn't have a driver's license. So she's like, all right, we're going back in time, and I need your help. What can I do? I'm not a scientist. Yeah, I need you to drive. Like, what? I'm from New York or California. Whichever one. Pick one. I can't drive. And maybe she's at school there and, visiting or whatever. And so Marty Jr. does the driving, and the granddaughter can do the thinking or the sciencing. And so, let's say the misconnection woman jumps into the time machine that has been left running. Marty Jr., how could you? And, it's acting wonky or whatever. And since we, get back here, it's hard to start. So they get in a time machine race. And, it could be close to, I don't know, whatever reason, it's ready to go. Yeah, it could be not fully broken, but hard to start and frozen in, like, going into time mode or whatever. And maybe the flux capacitor is running, and maybe it's, only has so much battery itself, and which they could maybe tie to their cell phone, so you'd always be able to tell. So they've got, a ticking clock. And therefore, if they can't turn the flux capacitor off, then if the misconnection woman jumps into it and races off, if she hits 88 miles per hour, she's going to go wherever, to the future, to the past, etc. So they get in the other time machine, I guess the classic one, and race after her. And then you have the highway chase where they are cutting her off, trying to keep her from going 88 miles per hour, which, again, I don't know, just sounds like a lot of fun to me. I mean, we're many years past the original trilogy and many, many movies into Fast and Furious movies, so, it's not the world's most exciting idea, I guess. It's not it's not a longer lasting light bulb. But it sounds fun. I still think, though, that they have to fail. And it's more interesting if they fail and she does go into the future, and then, oh no, maybe we thought we fixed the past, but now we've sent a person from the past into the future, which again happens in the second movie. They deliberately go into the future, see all the stuff. I think Doc Brown talks about, like, you can't do too much, Marty, you're going to contaminate the blah, 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 and Marty just happens to look exactly like his son, so that's the reason he has to be brought there. I mean, it's all, again, these movies are very, very intelligently thought out as far as the dramatics and the set pieces and all that. So I guess if the woman goes to the future, maybe they've already sent the dad back to the future, and if the woman's in the future, she could then arrive back at the home, and this car chase would be a pretty good climax as far as action goes. Arrive back at the home, and so the younger missed connection woman meets maybe already has met in the past, he's in disguise or something, whatever, the misconnection guys, he tries to figure out who she is. Misconnection father, the father. Anyway, she arrives at the home in the new time machine, basically is in the garage. She walks out the door, and she sees it's him, sees his pictures on the wall with the daughter, and, he just tells her the story. And she says something along the lines, and I guess this would have to be after the actual wedding night, party night, misconnection moment, that, she had a great time and likes him, but, she has, I don't know, some other reasons not to do it, that it's not right for her. And so the younger misconnection woman turns down to the older middle-aged father the idea of, once she gets back in time, or, interacting with, or having a connection with him in the past, which is good because, the granddaughter can arrive and sort of wipe her brow so that she'll still exist. And maybe that's why it never happened in the first place. When the father was swept away after he found the wedding ring that he lost, the misconnection woman didn't follow him because, it was, likes him but doesn't, not so much to pursue it or, move or change her life or whatever. or even to abandon her boyfriend that's in a shaky relationship. So she needs to go back in time and back to her spot in time. And the father, he took a shot, a wild and woolly one, going back in time and everything, and briefly goofing up the past, or goofing things up in the past to goof up the future. And so the misconnection woman, in her younger state, goes back in time, and then the kids, Marty Jr. and the scientist granddaughter, arrive back in the future, and they're sort of consoling the dad, but he's happy that he, tried, and then as they're about to move on, I guess the sort of dramatic climax of the movie completes itself with, a ring of the doorbell or a knock on the door, and the dad goes to the door, and there's the misconnection woman in the present day, in her middle-aged, age, saying that, he's like, why are you here? And she says, I changed my mind. And he could say, it took you long enough or something. And that would be, I think, a pretty nice emotional climax and resolution to the whole plot. Now, again, all the hijinks and stuff you do in the past, and, all, what the exact predicaments and pinch points and pressures are vis-a-vis, like, what works and doesn't work, what do you have to do and not do. I mean, I guess you just got to figure that out. You can't figure everything out well spitting things off on the fly on a podcast. But yeah, you can. I think there's enough there to have you have the things you need to. You know what you need to do in the first act to set up, so that you can play with those things in the second act. Both the fun of learning what characters were like in the past, the fun of our characters from the future, interacting with those characters in the past, learning about the past, interacting with the past. I mean, it's all the fish out of water stuff and the whole, like, you were like that when you were young. Like, it's all fun. It's all in the first movie, and it's all doable again. And I think fresh enough from a 2020s to 1990s-ish time frame, time jump. So, yeah. And then, you have those hijinks, you fix your problems, and then you have a cool new time machine car versus a classic time machine car race on the highway, trying to keep the new car from going 80 miles per hour. It fails. The father's attempt to find what happened to the misconnection woman fails, but then you learn that it actually worked fine, that it worked out, and there's a happy ending. And yeah, I think there's plenty there to build a fun Back to the Future Part 4 off of. And there you go. Well, yeah, I'm online as Throwaway Lines. This has been Let's Improv a Story. It was fun, and it may be the present now, but I'll see you again in the future. Have a good one. Bye.